This is a video about hooking up your Helix in 4-cable method or 2-cable method, depending on your amp. There's going to be some stuff. This is my kind of end point. Some of my first experiments, I might have done this once or twice before, but with 4-cable method, using this Cornford Carrera and the Helix. And what I'm also doing is switching between, here's the Helix preamp, which is a matchless channel 2. And then I've also got the more driven tone from the Cornford if I want it on the amp snapshot. Anyway, here's how you can do some of that if you want to. I guess the question you're asking is, how do I hook up with my Helix? And the answer is there are some options. You could leave it in the van whilst you do the deed, or you could take it in the room and let the Helix watch. So the first thing to ask yourself is, does my amp have an effects loop? So if the answer to this is no, then you've got really fairly limited options as to how you're going to connect up your Helix. If you don't have an effects loop, say you're using something like a Vox AC15 or a Fender Princeton or something like that, you can go into your guitar in, and then you can go out however you like really, but 1/4 inch out is what I'm going to use here, and into the input of my Cornford. On the actual board itself, what I would suggest doing would be to send this output to path 2A, and then the input here you want to set to none, I think, and so then you'd have all of this that you could send to the output multi here. Okay, and so I'll just show you what that might sound like. So yeah, now we've got our Helix as an effects board in front of the amp. So on this block I could put, maybe, I don't know, let's put on a pitch effect, poly capo, mix 50, and interval 12. You know, you could put drives here if you wanted to. So I'm going to put on a Timmy. You know, you can then set this up sort of like just a pedal board. Then on this one I'm going to put a delay, transistor tape. If you're just going into the front of the amp, don't forget to just go mono. There's no need to go stereo because you're only going to be working with mono stuff. You could still set up things like snapshots and bits and pieces, and you can put an EQ here maybe to do some of the same things that I talk about in general, where pushing different frequencies when we're using higher gain tones. But I'm going to attach that to, bypass here, attach that here, then you know, if you needed to do that sort of thing. So that I feel is like the simplest option. So then if we have an effects loop, let me just show you this. I'll drop these in as templates if you want. So this I would call like a 2-cable method. If you're familiar with some of this terminology, you understand why. But we're going to now consider, if we've got an effects loop, we could do something similar to this, but also using our effects loop. So this here, I'm going to send out, instead of path 2A, I want to send this out via send 1 and 2. And this here, I want to send out, or return, via return 1. And what effectively I want to do is put this path here in front of the amp, and this path here in the loop of the amp. Guitar goes in here, and then send goes to the input of your amp. So this will still be a 4-cable method, right? Then, so I've got a little 2-cable loom thing. Then the send of the amp is going to come back via the black cable into return. Then this one, then the output I want to be, well, output 1/4 inch, I think. Hopefully we won't get a massive feedback loop. So hopefully now, if I turn up the gain, that drive shouldn't be affected. The delay. So the idea here is if you have like an amp that can do channel switching or can have gain, that you can put stuff in the loop of your amp and it doesn't get increased in volume or anything like that, or get more dirty when you turn on the drive on your amp. So as I say there, that's a 4-cable method. So we're setting this top one here up for send 1 and 2, and then this one here we're going to set to return 1, and then send goes into the input of the amp, send 1, and then return is the send from the amp effects loop, and this 1/4 inch jack here will be the return from the amp. So that's a 4-cable method that you could try. But you will always have your amp in the loop in this setup, so you can't necessarily bypass the amp. So this is like a simplified 4-cable method. There are more complicated things we could do. So I'm going to save this as 4. So the other thing is that you could put, basically your looper should go in the effects loop really. So let me just show you why. So now if I start trying to do a loop, turn up the gain on the amp, loop remains clean. That's about the easiest way that I can explain why you would want to use your effects loop, even in a simple setup like this. So just again, very simply, our guitar goes into the input on the Helix, and then we change this output of this top line to send 1 and 2 by circling on here, and then we use a lead to go from the send 1 into the input of our guitar amp, the guitar in. Then we use the effects send from the amp, which we're going to send back into the return 1, and then we change this input here to return 1. So this line is receiving return 1. We put our effects that we want in the effects loop here, and then we change this output here to output 1/4 inch. Okay, now I would also consider doing something slightly different. So I'm going to just turn the volume down so I don't create an issue. So if you go to the template 2A, you see a really cool kind of way to explain what's going on here. So I think we're keeping all of the setup the same as in that last thing. So our send from the Helix, send 1, goes to the input of the guitar amp. Then the effects loop, we send from the amp into the return of the Helix, return 1. Okay, and then we send, I think that's what we want to do, so we've got an effects loop there, and then out of the jack there is how we then get back to the return of the guitar amp. So we're effectively blending our loops together. And you can see here what line 6 have programmed is this preamp, where we can use the deluxe norm from the actual Helix instead of whatever's on the front of our real amp. So I could switch between 2 sounds here. So that's on the amp, and this is on the Helix, I think. So now the gain is up full on the amp, and it's not having any impact. I can switch back. So I think if you've got an effects loop and you've got time to figure this stuff out, maybe that might be the best option. So you set up an effects loop like that. So we'll just try over here. We'll try and do this from scratch-ish. So up on here, I'm going to add in an effects loop. Effects loop 1, where are you? If I bypass this, we get rid of that amp. Bring in the amp. So the other thing I could do then is bring in the preamp from here. So I'm going to bring in something funky like the Derailed Ingrid, the train wreck this is, and set up. Now, if I bypass here, we no longer have our amp, so we should just have some of this funky stuff. I'm going to turn the master down a little bit. Turn the sag up or something. Got a bright switch there as well. And the basic principle here is that anything we want to go in the front of the amp we need to set before the effects loop. Actually, how would this work? So yeah, anything that we want to put in front of the amp we need to put before the effects loop, unless we have it bypassed, in which case it doesn't matter so much. And then anything we want to put in the effects loop of the amp, we put the other side of this effects loop here. So that should give you some sort of quick-ish things to try when you're hooking up with a real amp. I need to experiment with this a bit more, but this is kind of like the first time that I'm doing some of this stuff, so I thought it might be worth kind of sticking on the camera and trying this. The questions to ask yourself: does my amp have an effects loop? And if not, then you don't need to worry about a 4-cable method. You could do something super simple like this, where you're going to be running like a serial 2 processors into the front of your amp and path 2A, and then you just come out of this 1/4 inch into your amp. Then if you decide, okay, I'm ready to start trying something 4-cable-ish, there's this simple method where this up here, this path goes into the front of your amp, and then this path here goes into the effects loop of your amp. So the path would go guitar into the input of your amp, and then from your amp you send that into the return here, and then this 1/4 inch goes into the return of your amp. Then a way that is more flexible, you drop in this effects loop block. The actual cable routing is the same, and then anything you put before the effects loop will be in front of the amp. Anything you put after will be after the amp, and we can bypass this to bypass our amp's preamp altogether. Hopefully that is a little bit of an introduction to this. There are obviously some more advanced things that we could do, sort of combinations of bits and pieces, but I think I'll keep that for a separate video. Thank you for stopping by. Cheers.